Hi, my name is Kylie Pitcher, and this is my presentation on auditory impairment. I actually chose this topic because I had a baby just 8 months ago who was born with a hearing loss. And so this was educational for me, and you might hear me reference her time or two throughout this presentation. So it's just some basic health concerns that those with an auditory impairment might have, all kind of stem around not treating your hearing loss, especially children with hearing loss. If there's a child that's born with a hearing impairment, it needs to be treated promptly and appropriately for them, depending on what level of hearing loss they have, so that they can develop speech and language correctly. And then adults who develop hearing loss later in life and don't have it treated tend to feel isolated. They may have other health needs that they don't take care of, and they find that they're not as successful in school or professionally. And this is all because they lack the ability to communicate effectively. So in the media, you hardly ever hear or see anything about hearing loss. It's very underrepresented. Recently, a movie came out called A Star is Born, and this the actor had a hearing loss and suffered from tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears. And so that was kind of cool to have that just so recently kind of be brought to light. I saw this quote when I was looking for information on this, and it said, "In most movies, any imperfections of daily life are often erased from movie dialogue so that everyone seems perfect, and this includes the ability to hear." And this is really true. I could only think of one example just from my own experience where I've seen someone with a hearing loss in a show, and it was the TV show Supernatural. There's an actress, I've actually seen her in one other show, and her name was Shoshana Stern, and she's actually deaf and uses sign language and lip reading while she acts, and she does really well, and you can tell she hasn't let her hearing loss hold her back at all. So I thought that was pretty neat. So family support is very important for individuals with hearing loss, especially families with young children that are born with a hearing loss. It's often unexpected, as it was for us. We had no other children with a hearing loss, and it really came out of the blue for us. And so some good resources for these families are other parents who may have an older child and may be experienced with hearing loss, and these are a good resource for new parents who are just starting to navigate those waters. There's also faith-based family support systems that a lot of people lean on if they are religious or spiritual, and this can be helpful for them, especially mentally and emotionally. And then another really important resource for families with an individual with hearing loss is their professional team. So their doctors and their audiologists and the people that are there to help make sure that the hearing loss is treated so that they can function in society to the best of their abilities. And then there's different programs there's a lot of programs, especially in Utah, that those with hearing loss can use. The Up to 3 program is one that I put here as an example. This is something we're doing with my daughter. We started meeting with them when she was only like a month old, and they help to make sure that from birth up to 3 years old that the child is developing language appropriately, so that when it's time to start school that they are on track with their peers. So the role of peers in the life of someone with hearing loss is important for mental health, especially in developing children. Children who don't have their hearing loss treated can have a lot of social and emotional delays. And so it's important that they be treated so that they can feel as normal as possible. The Utah Schools for the Deaf and the Blind is a great resource for this. They make sure that these kids are getting the support that they need for whatever level of deafness they may have, so that they can stay on track to graduate high school and things with their peers. And they also provide summer camps and different programs throughout the year to encourage peer interaction. So this is really important. When talking about if hearing loss has a cyclical nature. Hearing loss can be caused by a gene mutation. We think that's what it was the reason our daughter was born with hearing loss. They suspect, although we're still kind of trying to find the reason, that the cilia in her cochlea in her inner ear are either malformed or something's wrong there, which has decreased her ability to sense sound. There's other conditions that can be genetic, like otosclerosis. There's a few examples I put here. But so this can happen through the generations, but also coping skills can be passed on through generations. And if if families don't have healthy coping mechanisms, then that can be passed on generation to generation. So this study found that children in lower income homes with a hearing loss had a greater incidence of abuse and neglect in the home. And so it's important that we provide education and resources to the community to teach these families how to cope with and how to treat these children, so that instead of this cycle of abuse that gets passed on generation to generation, along with the hearing loss, we can pass on healthy coping mechanisms. And it's the same thing with adults. They tend to experience more depression, so it's important to stop that cycle also and teach healthy coping mechanisms. So legally or politically, in Utah just recently, in 2017, they passed a bill to kind of amend the terminology when referring to hearing loss. So they changed it from saying hearing impairment to deaf or hard of hearing. They defined harmful industrial noise and defined when an employer is liable for when a hearing loss occurs. They also defined qualifications for scholarships based on being deaf or hard of hearing. So this just kind of made it easier for these people to get the resources they need by making the terminology make a little more sense. So culturally, potential barriers in the environment. The main barrier, once again, to people with hearing loss is untreated hearing loss. 100% of children are not screened at birth for hearing loss, which is sad, and it should be done. Because this is actually how we found out my daughter had hearing loss. It was her newborn screening in the hospital. But this doesn't happen for all children, and so they don't get treated when they need to. It's when they're older and their parents start noticing that they aren't developing appropriately that their treatment starts, and then they're already behind. And then not all children, even if they find out they have a hearing loss, receive services for that. And the biggest reason is because the family denies that service. A lot of times these are financial reasons. So that's a huge barrier for these kids. And then adults who have an untreated hearing loss, like we said before, tend to feel isolated. And social isolation, this occurs for people with hearing loss across the nation, especially in the elderly. They'll become depressed a lot easier if their hearing loss isn't treated. They can't communicate the way that they maybe have been used to in their lives. And they might have other health care needs that they haven't taken care of also that need to be addressed. So that's the main barrier for people with hearing loss. Internationally, more than 5% of the world's population has a hearing loss, but only 17% of that population is actually treated for it. And then hearing losses can be caused by genetics, like we talked already, but it can also be caused by complications at birth and different infectious diseases. So third world countries, or countries with lower income or poor access to health care, such as some countries in Africa and Middle East, have a higher number of individuals with untreated hearing loss, and this compounds that issue of social isolation. So when talking about socioeconomic status, cost of hearing aids is probably at the top of the list. From my personal experience, we got my daughter's hearing aids when she was a month old, and they were $3,000. That is unreasonable for some people, and there are a lot of insurances that don't actually cover hearing aids, and so this is a huge reason why hearing loss might be untreated. There's also a stigma associated with wearing hearing aids. A lot of people only associate them with the elderly and may be embarrassed to wear them. Different lifestyle choices, or just lifestyles in general. If you work in an environment that has high noise, such as like a construction environment, and you don't wear proper hearing protection, this can lead to hearing loss. So there's a lot of different socioeconomic issues that kind of either compound or cause problems with hearing impairments. So when it comes to race and ethnicity, hearing loss occurs across the board, but non-Hispanic white adults are the most likely to have a hearing loss, and non-Hispanic black adults have the lowest occurrence of hearing loss. So this is good to know because it can kind of guide treatment and testing to make sure that we are testing the people that are at the highest risk. So with religion, like we talked before, sometimes religion is a great resource for families for support, but can also provide stress to people with hearing loss because it's a really hard listening situation. There's a lot going on, there's a lot of people, and it can be hard for people with a hearing loss to catch everything that's going on. And this can cause spiritual distress for people, especially those that believe church attendance is important for their spiritual health, and once again adds to those feelings of isolation from others. When talking about gender, this is something new that I learned. Men are 2 times as likely as women to have a hearing loss, but are less likely than women to seek help or to acknowledge their hearing loss. And then men also tend to lose higher frequencies first, which makes it harder for them to hear consonants, and women tend to lose lower frequencies first, which makes it hard for them to hear vowels. So this kind of causes a communication divide. Location matters a lot when it comes to hearing loss. Third world countries with poor access to health care, like we talked before, have a high number of untreated hearing loss. And then when trying to talk about telehealth to kind of bridge that gap, it's hard for this population just due to the nature of hearing loss. Telehealth might not always be the best option. Living in Utah is a great place, though. There are a lot of resources in Utah. We are the first state to offer deaf and blind endorsement, and then deaf and blind students in Utah are ranked #1 in the United States for high school completion. So just some implicit biases with hearing loss is that people are less intelligent with hearing loss, and that they are selective with their hearing. They choose what they do and don't want to hear. And that they are rude because maybe they are loud or they're constantly asking what, and might seem irritated, but this isn't because they're rude, it's because they are frustrated. And then some explicit biases is a lot of people just say like hearing loss, old people have hearing loss. This doesn't happen to younger people. And that hearing aids are unsightly, which isn't true because my daughters are pink and they are very cute, and she is definitely not elderly. Internationally, like we talked before, living in Utah, we have a plethora of resources for hearing loss. We have a nationally accredited audiology program at Utah State University. We have Sound Beginnings, the Up to 3 program. We have the Utah School for the Deaf and Blind, the Hearing Aid Recycle program to try to help people who can't afford them get them. And then just a huge variety of different resources that we can utilize just living here. So yeah, that is my presentation. I hope that was informational, and thank you.